Good morning. It is the Monday before the AP World exam, and for many of you, you're starting to think about how am I going to break down my time? How am I going to use that 40 to 45 minutes that the College Board has given me to write my DBQ? So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to lay out two different approaches that I would use if I were taking this test this week. Now, those of you who took the AP European History and AP US History exams, sorry, this video didn't come out sooner. Nonetheless, perhaps we can use it as a learning opportunity. There's no one right way to write this essay in terms of your approach. But the reason I'm doing this video is because I think there is a tendency for many students to look at that rubric that we've gone over, look at that, the rubric that the College Board has put out there and think that I need to write my essay step by step as it's laid out in the rubric. And that simply is not the case, especially now that you can write this or type this on a Word doc. It makes much more sense to write it in an efficient way. And as time continues to elapse, you can throw in other things later on down the line rather than going point by point. So let me just share my screen with you. I have two different approaches I'm going to walk you through. Again, I want to emphasize that this is not the one only way that you have to do it or can do it, but it's two potential approaches that might be helpful. Okay, so the first one I want to emphasize is if I look at the prompt and I'm familiar with the topic of the prompt. Okay, this is a great position to be in. You should have a lot of confidence there if that's the case. But if I know what the topic is, let's say it's on the Qing Dynasty and I just spent 2 hours reviewing the Qing Dynasty, I got all my notes ready, it's locked and loaded. In that case, I'm going to first write my contextualization paragraph. Okay, and this again is going to be 3 to 5 sentences, some significant concrete details that'll lead me to my thesis. I'm not going to write my thesis quite yet because that should be informed by the documents themselves. So my next step will be then to read and annotate the docs. Based on the timing that the College Board has given us in previous years for a 60-minute, 7-document DBQ, we should be spending about a quarter of our time reading and annotating the docs. That boils down to about 10 minutes. You can do it faster if you're a quick reader. It may take you a little longer, but this is an estimate of where you probably want to be. After I read and annotate the docs, I'm going to tack on my thesis statement. So I'm going to spend 2 or 3 minutes doing that right on the end of my contextualization paragraph. Remember, this is the only part of the essay the College Board cares where you put it. It must be either in the first or last paragraphs. Don't screw that up, okay? Just don't do it. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to spend 10 minutes approximately capping or doing source information for the 2 easiest documents for me. Now, again, docs 2 and 3 might jump out at you. It might be docs 1 and 4 for me. It doesn't really matter, but do the ones that look the easiest. And I would strongly suggest you try to do context, try to do audience, at least 2 different letters of that cap for each of those 2 documents. That way, if you screw up one, you have a backup. And then if you do this successfully, if you successfully cap or hip 2 documents, that should get you 4 points on the DBQ rubric. Okay, so again, we're being efficient. 10 minutes for 4 points, that's pretty good. Once I finish that, I'm going to tackle the other 2 to 3 documents for evidence point 3. Remember, you got to do 4 documents total to support your argument to get evidence point 3. So I'm going to do those 2 to 3 to get that. Next, I'm going to throw in my outside evidence where it's appropriate. Again, this is evidence points number 4 and 5. I'm going to look up and research these if it's necessary. But if not, like I said, if I know the topic well, I should have them at the top of my head. Maybe they're in front of me in my notes, but I'm going to do that in about 3 to 4 minutes. Lastly, I'm going to try to attempt complexity point, analysis and reasoning point number 3, the so-called unicorn point. In another video, I talked more explicitly about how to get that point. So that's not the purpose of this video. But remember, it is the last step that I'm recommending you take because it is often the most difficult for students to get. So I would suggest not spending more than 3 to 4 minutes doing it. You might attempt it more than one way or more than one time. That's perfectly acceptable. Some students try to weave it into their other paragraphs. That also is fine. Others prefer to separate it out into another paragraph. Either is acceptable. Now, if you add up the math for the long side, you're just under 40 minutes now, so you have a couple minutes to review as needed. And then with that last 5 minutes, you should be submitting, okay? Now, moving on to the other method, if I'm unfamiliar or hazy with the prompt, the reason I spend time on this is because a lot of students struggle with test anxiety, and if they see a prompt they're not familiar with, they freeze and they really, really struggle to get going. I'm going to tell you that is a bad plan, and you really need to snap out of it quickly because the clock is ticking. So the first step to do that would be to read and annotate the docs in that case. And again, that's going to be about 10 minutes. It's the same amount of time, but about 10 minutes to do that. From there, you want to write your contextualization and thesis. And by now you've read and annotated the docs, you should have a familiarity at least a little bit with the topic as it pertains to the evidence given to you by the documents. So you could probably write a decent essay just analyzing the documents. So again, 5 to 7 minutes to write your contextualization and thesis paragraph. And then the second, or rather the third step, is the same as step 4 in the other way, which is to cap or hip the 2 easiest docs for you. Remember that a successful capping of 2 documents will amount to about 4 points on the DBQ rubric. 10 minutes for 4 points is a good use of your time. Again, the next step would be to tackle the other 2 to 3 documents for evidence point 3. Then lastly, you're going to start to look stuff up, because remember, you're hazy on the topic. So you're going to need to look up some information either in your notes, your textbook, last resort online, and using that research or your notes, you're going to throw in evidence point 4 and 5, your outside evidence, and then you're going to attempt complexity. Both of those steps are going to be, that's 3 points you're aiming for, are going to take about 6 to 8 minutes to do those if you are efficient with your time. Now, sometimes it might take less than that, but again, both of the outside evidence and the analysis and reasoning point number 3, or the complexity point, you can't just have a mere mention or a phrase. You have to do a couple sentences really to demonstrate to the reader that you're not just arbitrarily or randomly throwing in little nuggets of history, all right? It's tied directly to the topic of the prompt. It supports your argument. It extends your argument, that type of thing. And then again, you're going to be left with about 2 minutes to review. Okay. Now, I can't emphasize this enough. These are not the only 2 ways to go about writing your DBQ or to break down the timing of this. The reason I'm presenting these 2 are because most students fall into one of those 2 camps. Either they know the prompt right out of the gate, or it's going to take them working through the documents to kind of get their mind back in the framework of the topic of the prompt. Either way, you should not be married to this idea that you have to go point by point as the rubric is laid out. If you're efficient with your time and go about the points in the most obvious and easiest way, you're more likely to get a higher score on that DBQ rubric. Remember, this is on a word processing doc, so you do have the ability to, put things in how you choose, add stuff, change it, revise. One thing I would remind you, though, is we are not getting graded on spelling. We're not getting graded on grammar or even style. So don't spend time really at all, doing spell check or grammar check or worrying about how well you crafted a sentence. As long as it's relatively clear what you're trying to say, you should be fine. At the end of the day, people, this is just a test, but I don't want any of you to be, crippled, if you will, by this test anxiety. It's something that if you rely on the skills that you've been building this entire year, you're going to be okay. Step by step, people, document by document, you can do this. Please like, comment, or subscribe. I hope this is helpful. We'll talk to you later on this week as we prepare our last minute things before our DBQ. All right, people, have a good one.